Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to today's explainer. When we think about national borders, our minds almost automatically go straight to the physical stuff, right? We picture lines meticulously drawn across huge mountain ranges, or borders snaking along massive rivers, or maybe heavily guarded fences out in the desert. We think of dirt, we think of rock. But today, we're going to completely shatter that conventional map. We're heading to the absolute extremes of our planet to look at sovereign territories defined not by the ground you can walk on, but by deep, unfathomable water and incredibly thick, unforgiving ice. It's really about how geography fundamentally shifts when we leave solid ground behind.
Now, when we look at the massive region of Oceania, the whole definition of a nation gets turned completely upside down. For a lot of the countries scattered across this huge area, an astonishing 99% of their sovereign territory isn't even land. It's ocean. I mean, really, take a second to let that scale sink in. Imagine a country where almost every single square mile you govern, protect, and rely on is deep, blue, open water. It completely flips our traditional understanding of a state's geography, right? We're trading continental landmasses for these vast, vast aquatic domains. Which leaves a mere 1% as actual walkable land. Just 1%. This single statistic is a massive paradigm shift. You see, historically, we've been heavily conditioned to equate a country's global footprint, its military might, and its cultural identity directly with the dirt under its citizens' feet. But down here, that logic just straight up doesn't apply. In Oceania, a nation's economy, its cultural heritage, its food supply, and its geopolitical power are all tied almost entirely to the sea. The ocean isn't just what surrounds these nations, the ocean essentially is the nation.
Section 1. Beyond Land, Redefining Borders.
So how do you even begin to map out a space that's so heavily dominated by water? Well, we have to look at the major regions making up this part of the world. First up is Polynesia, which literally translates to many islands. And this specific territory forms a vast, honestly incredible geographic triangle. We're talking about stretching all the way from Hawaii in the far north down to New Zealand in the southwest, and all the way across to Easter Island in the southeast. It brilliantly illustrates how borders here aren't just tight little clusters of rocks. Instead, they're these sprawling, dynamic networks of maritime navigation and shared culture, connecting communities across thousands and thousands of miles of open ocean. Now, what I find really fascinating here is the beautiful irony of the name Micronesia. The term literally means small islands, and it encompasses stunning nations like Guam and Palau. And yeah, it's absolutely true that the physical land masses, the actual places where you can build a house or go for a walk, are incredibly tiny. But these nations command massive, sweeping swaths of oceanic space. So they might be tiny in terms of physical dirt, but geographically and economically, they are absolute aquatic giants commanding immense areas of the Pacific. Finally, to complete this massive regional map, we have Melanesia, which means Black Islands, encompassing countries like Fiji and Papua New Guinea. So by defining these three distinct regions, Polynesia, Micronesia, and Melanesia, we really start to see the sprawling reality of Oceania. But looking at all this vastness kind of begs a huge logistical and geopolitical question, right? It's a question that literally reshapes international law. How exactly do these physically tiny nations legally enforce, utilize, and completely control millions upon millions of square miles of open water? Section 2, the 200-mile rule.
And this brings us brilliantly to the exact legal mechanism making these huge oceanic empires possible, the Exclusive Economic Zone, or EEZ. Under modern international law, you see, a country's borders don't just magically stop where the beach meets the breaking waves. A sovereign nation is actually granted exclusive control over all natural resources, extending up to 200 nautical miles outward from its shoreline. This invisible 200-mile buffer dictates exactly who holds the golden ticket to some incredibly valuable resources hidden beneath the surface. We're talking massive commercial fisheries, untapped deep-sea oil reserves, and highly coveted mineral deposits right on the ocean floor. Let's take the nation of Kiribati as the ultimate example of this rule in action. Physically, its landmass is remarkably tiny, practically a speck in the vastness of the Pacific. But because that 200-mile EEZ extends radially around every single one of its widely scattered islands, its actual sovereign footprint is absolutely astronomical. This single legal rule transforms a tiny island nation into a major global fishing power, giving it staggering geopolitical weight in international trade negotiations. For Kiribati, the ocean is literally their economic engine, and it gives them leverage that completely defies their physical size. It's a total game changer.
Section 3, Antarctica's frozen frontier.
Okay, so shifting gears from the warm, resource-rich waters of the Pacific, we're now going to travel far south to the absolute bottom of the world. Down here in Antarctica, the very concepts of territory, conventional borders, and ownership are entirely suspended. Historically, the entire continent has been conceptually carved up into pie slices. 7 different countries, including Australia, have staked formal claims to these various slices, sitting right alongside massive, entirely unclaimed areas of ice. Now, we look at this purely as a historical reality. These specific claims exist on paper, reflecting a bygone geopolitical era where exploring nations were just rushing to plant their flags in the most unforgiving environments on Earth. But unlike the aggressive, high-stakes resource grabs we see playing out with those exclusive economic zones in the ocean, Antarctica operates under a completely different, almost surreal paradigm. The territorial claims here are quite literally frozen in time. It's essentially a permanent truce held in a state of suspended animation. No nation is actively expanding their slice of the pie, armies aren't massing on the ice shelves, and the geopolitical borders are kept deliberately and legally on ice. So the crucial point here is how this incredibly unique global truce is actually maintained. And it all comes down to the landmark 1959 Antarctic Treaty. This treaty legally and permanently designated the entire continent as a zone of peace. There are 3 absolute rules you need to know about this. First, military activity is strictly and unequivocally forbidden, period. 0 military bases, 0 weapons testing. Second, there's a strict ban on mining, which was later solidified by the Protocol on Environmental Protection to stop anyone from exploiting the resources. And third, the treaty mandates the free, open exchange of all scientific data. It purposefully hits pause on sovereign expansion and prioritizes collaborative international science over just accumulating more dirt and rock. Now, this creates a really fascinating geopolitical loophole, especially when we look at the behavior of global superpowers like the United States and Russia. Both of these countries operate in what you might call a neutral zone dynamic. They officially refuse to recognize any of the territorial claims made by those 7 original claimant countries. However, because the treaty universally prioritizes science above everything else, they can freely build highly sophisticated research facilities literally anywhere they choose on the continent. Take the massive Amundsen-Scott South Pole Station as a prime example. The U.S. doesn't legally own the land it sits on, but they have the undisputed right to occupy it, build on it, and conduct research there indefinitely. Pretty wild, right?
So, we've traveled from the invisible, resource-rich borders of Oceania that stretch hundreds of miles out into the deep sea, all the way to the suspended frozen claims of Antarctica, where territory belongs to scientific advancement rather than marching armies. And it leaves us with a pretty profound thought to take away. As global climates radically change, as the ice melts, and as the international hunt for critical resources really starts to intensify, how long will these invisible and frozen borders actually hold? When the geopolitical stakes get high enough, who truly owns the extremes of our Earth? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll leave you to ponder that question until next time.